Sports Business Vodcast. This vodcast will aim to answer the following questions. In Grand Slam tennis events, women play best of 3 sets while men play best of 5. This structural difference cannot be justified now that many tournament organisers offer similar prize money to women as they offer to men. Is the debate over equal pay principally about time on court? How significant also is the respective roles of male and female players as entertainers who attract crowds, sponsors and the media gaze at major tournaments? We'll provide a brief history of tennis and how equal pay came about, then tune into a discussion about equal pay and the structural difference. We'll conclude with some recommendations for solving the debate. 1881 saw the first official U.S. National Championship played at the Newport Casino in Newport, Rhode Island. The first women's champs were played in Wimbledon in 1884, closely followed by the U.S. in 1887. 1891 saw the first French championships played at Roland Garros. Tennis had taken a firm root in Australia by 1880, but the first Australian championships weren't played until 1905. In September 1970, the birth of women's professional tennis was launched when 9 players signed $1 contracts with world tennis publisher Gladys Heldman to compete in a new women's tour, the Virginia Slims Series. The inaugural $7,500 Virginia Slims of Houston was established on September 23, 1970, and it was the event that became the groundbreaker for all others. Following this, in 1973, for the first time, the US Open offered equal prize money to men and women. 1984 saw the Australian Open join the US, although there was a period between 96 and 2000 where prize money rose and fell, and in 87 and 88 women even received more than men. Roland Garros was the next to follow suit in 2006, closely and finally followed by...
This is the history of tennis. Tennis is proper old, like 12th century France old. But tennis wasn't always called tennis. Originally it was called jeu de paume. Fun to say and hard to play, it was held indoors, with matches beginning by shouting, "Tennis!" By the 1500s, rackets were introduced made of wood and sheep gut. The French couldn't get enough of jeu de paume. These two kings died shortly after playing, so they probably loved it a little bit less. But over in England, and hearing of its conquest of French kings, Henry VIII held the first jeu de paume tournament in 1740. Back across the pond, the French Revolution kicked off on a jeu de paume court, which didn't turn out well for another French king. By the 19th century, we saluted Charles Goodyear, inventor of vulcanized rubber. The tennis ball was born. Then in 1873, Major Walter Wingfield released a version of jeu de paume that could be played on grass. Don't ask me why, but he called it Schwarz-Sticky. In 1877, the All England Club held the first Wimbledon tournament, with Spencer Gore taking out the prize of 12 whole guineas. By 1882, the net was lowered and overarm serving was allowed. Then in 1905, the Australian Open was established, and by 1924, it was considered one of the 4 majors. The Open moved all across Australia, from Perth to Sydney to New Zealand, before finding a home at Kooyong in 1972. By 1988, the Australian Open had revived the sport's jeu de paume heritage and was being played indoors, where the traditional grass court was traded in for hard court, which in 2008 turned blue. For over 800 years this game has grown, a game that savours the past, shaped by heritage but never defined by it. And while it's still played by royalty, by kings, queens, those waiting for the throne and even the odd joker, this game is now just called tennis.
This debate is mainly about the structural difference between the men and women's Grand Slam games. Here we discover how this structure has changed over the years. The US Championship of 1891 saw the women play a 5-set final for the first time. The tournament briefly went back to best of 3 in 1893, but in 94 both finals were best of 5. In total, 6 5-set women's finals were played in the US Open, culminating in 1901. The US National Lawn Tennis Association decided that 5 sets was simply too much for those poor dainty women wearing corsets and ankle-length petticoats to be put through, so they changed the tournament back to 3 sets. Players voted to play 5 sets like their male counterparts in 1976. However, no tournament owners took up the women on their offer. It wasn't until 1984 that the WTA decided to experiment with the format themselves. They decided that the season-ending championships, in which only the top tournament players on tour attended, would play a 5-set final. Over the years in which this format stood, there was only one lopsided game, which happened to be the first year, with the winner taking the title in the first 3 sets. After that, there were 7 4-set finals and 3 5-set finals. In 1991, the championship switched back to 3-set finals, as it was a big ask for the only 5-set game to be played at the end of a long season where some players were playing 2 games per day. The Australian Open announced in 1994 that the following year would see the women play best of 5. Due to a lack of communication between Australian tennis and the WTA were not happy that they were not consulted with this decision and had the decision to play the best of 5 overturned before it could be implemented. We're now going to tune into a broadcast of a roundtable discussion about equal pay and structural difference justification with Cameron Longfield and Josh Mercer.
So equal pay in Grand Slam tournaments, we've reached that level. However, the issue is they don't think women don't deserve the same amount of men in those slams. But in smaller tournaments, men are playing best of threes, same as women, but men are earning considerably more. Why is this the case? And what can we do to change that?
Someone needs to step up from the smaller tournaments and give equal pay. It's happened at Grand Slam level. It's not good enough not to happen at the lower levels. They can talk about men being more entertaining, getting more viewership as much as they want, but women are just as entertaining. They're both playing best of 3 sets.
Yeah, exactly. Basically the same time on court, if that's the argument they're going to use for the Grand Slams. So
yeah, so they just need to. I'm not sure what the organisers are thinking, but the Grand Slams have stepped up. It's time for them to step up and put equal pay, especially the same amount of time on court. It makes no sense as to why these small tournaments do this.
So the argument is that 5 sets to 3 sets in the Grand Slams should be changed. We've heard from the WTA and others that they've asked and they haven't changed it. Why do you think they haven't changed to 5 sets for women as well?
Why they haven't would be, their main reason is the scheduling. Unfortunately, it hasn't been proved how much sort of room they've got around it, especially with the finals being on 2 completely different days. They just need to really have a look at that. They could possibly even work it out with whoever who they're with, whether it's Prime, whether it's Fox, and just see if they can just get get it right. If it doesn't fit in with the other tournaments, that could be a little bit of a problem, considering some of them are a bit of a warm-up, and for some people, some of the players that acclimatise to the Australian heat, like say for the Australian Open, but they really should just look at that and be prepared and be open to working with each other.
Yeah. So I don't see why they can't just, the first week, best of 3, second week when the quarters come, best of 5. As the money increases,
that should be, as the money goes up, it should change. Tennis being a traditional game, they like to stick with that, but they just need to suck it up, get the women to play what they've asked for, and that is best of 5.
I think, as Djokovic has mentioned, sponsors more people going into the game for men, that they deserve more money because of this?
No, they don't. Women get just as good a crowd. Finals for women are sold out. They do.
Sometimes sell out quicker.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes they have good ratings as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's just a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that they're getting equal pay at Grand Slams. But I don't think he's right at all. It could be good for the women's tennis just to go to the 5 sets, so they could pick up more viewers.
Yeah.
There's
definitely more popular.
Yeah, best of 3 can be over so quickly.
Yeah.
You found that out. We've found that out in the past. Some people complained about being over too quickly, paying too much money, but yeah, they just need to get the girls to play 5 sets, and then they'll see the viewership go up.
Yeah,
I think the tournaments, the Grand Slams, need to just step up, be willing to part ways with tradition, so they can give the women what they're asking for, and they're asking to be best of 5 sets. You've got some people from some tournament directors saying that, I think it was David Brewer, claims that it's news to him that women want to play 5 sets. I'm guessing he's just an ignorant. Because everywhere you look online,
the WTA have stated that.
Yeah,
according to the organisers. So
that's exactly what. So they've gone to organisers of the Grand Slams. They want to play 5 sets. Get them to play 5 sets.
Yeah. Just
be prepared to work with the women to do that.
Yeah.
But not one person, but someone from the Grand Slams needs to just work and part ways with tradition so we can move forward.
The tennis tour revenue graph in this slide demonstrates just how huge the disparity in pay at tour level where both men and women play best of 3 sets. It is nonsensical to assume that the debate is principally about time on court when there is such a huge disparity in the tournaments in which time on court is the same. We have discovered in the discussion that women want to play 5 sets like their male counterparts, and none of the owners of the tournaments are taking the steps to make this happen. The debate is more about gender equality and stands because tennis is a leading sport in pay equality. Lots of sports have tried to follow, yet tennis is one of the only sports who have successfully been able to implement equal pay at this level. In an article published on the 21st of March 2016 by the BBC, following comments made by Novak Djokovic questioning equal pay, some interesting statistics were shown in relation to male and female players and their respective viewers. Excluding Grand Slams, TV viewership numbers during 2015 for men's ATP Tour was 973 million compared to the WTA Tour, which only gained 395 million viewers. Also, in 2015, the men's US Open final drew 3.3 million viewers compared to 1.6 million for the women's final. This largely would have been influenced by the individual athletes taking part in the finals. The women's finals were between 2 lower-profile Italian players, where the men's final was between world number 1 Novak Djokovic and top-profile athlete Roger Federer in a rematch of the Wimbledon final earlier that year. However, in 2013 and 14, the women's US Open final was watched by more viewers than the men's final. 2013 was between US star Serena Williams and Victoria Azarenka, number 1 and number 2 in the world at the time of the game, and the 2014 final, Serena Williams again featured against Caroline Wozniak of Denmark. Following Serena Williams' previous 2 US Open wins, the 2015, for the first time in history, the women's final sold out faster than the men's, as fans were sure Williams would be featuring in the final. Williams was, however, shockingly knocked out of the semi-final by an unseeded Italian athlete. These statistics, alongside the table shown, demonstrates that the roles of the respective players draw crowds at different tournaments. The players can be named entertainers no matter their profile. However, it is evident that the higher the profile players draw larger TV audiences and ticket sales. Moving forward, we came up with some recommendations for tennis as an international sport to adopt to diminish this debate. Firstly, if one Grand Slam took a step forward and introduced 5 sets to the women's games, the others would eventually follow suit. This would produce more entertaining women's games similar to men's, it would eliminate the need to debate equal pay, and it would grow overall interest in tennis immensely. Secondly, the debate may not stand if the lesser tournaments were to offer equal prize money to men and women. We saw earlier just how big the disparity is, and for tennis to continue to be a leading sport in gender equality, they need to look at increasing the amount of tournaments that offer equal pay. Thank you.